You look at the headlines right now, and it feels like every single day there's a new rumor attached to the 49ers. Justin Jefferson, Max Crosby, A.J. Brown, trade up, trade back, more cap space, John Lynch saying they're going to be more aggressive. And on the surface, it sounds exciting. It sounds like the Niners are gearing up to go shopping for stars and push all their chips to the middle of the table. But here's the thing. Are they really in that position? Do the 49ers actually have momentum right now? Or is this just that part of the offseason where big names start flying around and fans get pulled into the hype cycle? That's what I want to talk through with you today, because there's a big difference between making one splashy move and actually building a roster that can compete with teams like the Rams and Seahawks over the next few years. And when you really dig into this, you start to realize how complicated this offseason actually is for San Francisco. Yes, the Niners do have more flexibility than they did last year after that reset. That part is true. But they also have holes all over the roster. Interior pass rush, edge depth opposite Nick Bosa, linebacker, corner, safety, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line. That's not one or two spots. That's half the starting lineup. So when people start throwing out names like Justin Jefferson or Max Crosby and saying the Niners should go big, you've got to ask yourself one simple question. At what cost? Because trading for a superstar doesn't just mean adding a great player. It usually means giving up multiple high draft picks, maybe a key young piece, and then turning around and paying that player top of the market money. And once you do that, suddenly you're asking rookies and minimum contracts to fill in all those other gaps. Before we dive into all of that real quick, if you enjoy these Niners breakdowns and you want more off-season coverage, make sure you're subscribed and help us push toward 1,000 subscribers. It really does make a difference. And go ahead and like the video too if you want to see more roster and draft content coming your way. Let me ask you this right now. Do you honestly feel like the 49ers have momentum heading into this offseason? Type yes or no in the comments and tell me why. Because once you answer that, it makes it a lot easier to frame the next part of this conversation, which is the star trade rumors themselves and whether any of these blockbuster moves actually make sense for San Francisco. When you start breaking down these star trade rumors one by one, that's where things get really interesting. Because on paper, guys like Justin Jefferson, Max Crosby, and A.J. Brown all sound incredible in a Kyle Shanahan offense or on this defense. Any one of them instantly upgrades the roster. There's no debate about that. The real debate is what you're willing to give up to get them, and whether that kind of move actually fixes what's wrong with this team. Let's start with Max Crosby, because he's probably the name that fires people up the most. Pairing Crosby with Nick Bosa would be scary. That's a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks. But think about what it would actually take. You're not talking about a single first-round pick. You're talking about Mac Jones, this year's first, probably next year's first, and maybe another pick on top of that. That's the type of package it usually costs to land an elite pass rusher in his prime. Now ask yourself this. If you spend all that on Crosby, who's playing left guard? Who's your future left tackle? Who's lining up next to Fred Warner at linebacker? Who's your number one corner? You'd have one incredible edge duo, but you'd still be thin everywhere else. And on top of that, Crosby is in his late 20s and has dealt with injuries the last couple seasons. I love the player, but that's a massive investment for a team that already has a long shopping list. Justin Jefferson is even tougher to justify. He's one of the best receivers in football, no question. But you'd be giving up multiple first-rounders and then paying him one of the biggest contracts in the entire NFL. That's elite production at an elite price. And while he would transform the passing game, the Niners still need speed, depth, and reliability across the whole receiver room, not just one superstar at the top. Plus, you still haven't fixed the offensive line, and Brock Purdy can't throw from his back. A.J. Brown is the most realistic of the three, but he comes with his own complications. He's still a top-tier wide receiver. He's physical, explosive, great after the catch, and he'd be the best receiver Kyle Shanahan has had since Julio Jones. In Shanahan's system, You could do some really creative stuff with him. The problem is price and availability. If the Eagles even consider moving him, you're probably looking at something like a second and a third, maybe more. And do you really think Philadelphia wants to send a star to an NFC rival when both teams expect to contend? Let me pause here and ask you something. If you could only choose one of these players, who would it be? Crosby, Jefferson, or A.J. Brown? Drop the name in the comments and tell me why. Here's where I land on it. All three are great players, but none of these moves exist in a vacuum. Every big trade creates 3 or 4 new problems somewhere else on the roster. That's why I keep coming back to this idea that the responsible path for the Niners probably isn't one massive swing. It's spreading those resources out and actually hitting on draft picks and smart free agent signings. And if you're enjoying this breakdown so far, make sure you like the video and subscribe. We're closing in on 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps this channel grow, because when you zoom out from the flashy names, you start to see that the real story of this offseason isn't about one superstar. It's about all the areas the 49ers need to upgrade, just to get back into serious Super Bowl contention, and that starts with taking an honest look at the roster from top to bottom. Now let's zoom out and talk about the actual needs on this roster, because this is where the offseason really gets defined. It's easy to dream about blockbuster trades, but when you look at the 49ers depth chart, you realize this team has work to do at almost every level. Start with the offensive line, because everything on offense depends on that. Center and left. Guard are major problems. Jake Brendel hasn't been good enough, and Spencer Burford is probably gone in free agency. Even if Burford somehow comes back, you still can't feel great about that interior. And then there's the future at left tackle. Trent Williams isn't getting younger, and at some point you need a real succession plan. If Brock Purdy is going to continue to develop and stay healthy, protecting him has to be priority number 1. You can't keep asking him to overcome constant pressure up the middle. Then you move to wide receiver, and this is another area that needs a serious reset. The Niners desperately need more speed and explosiveness. They ranked near the bottom of the league in average separation, and that showed up in big moments. Jawan Jennings is tough and clutch, but he's not fast, and he's not a true number 1. If his market gets into that 18 to 20 million range, you almost have to walk away. The smarter move is probably adding a vertical threat in free agency and drafting a receiver early who can create yards after the catch. That gives you youth, speed, and cost control instead of sinking everything into one expensive veteran. Tight end is another quiet concern. Who's the long-term answer there? George Kittle is still elite, but you can't ignore age and wear and tear. They need someone who can grow into that role over time, not just a depth piece. Defensively, it's just as complicated. You're getting Nick Bosa back. You're getting Fred Warner back. That alone helps a lot. But you still need pass rush help at defensive end and defensive tackle. C.J. West and Alfred Collins showed some promise, especially against the run, but this defense needs more juice getting after the quarterback. A young edge rusher or interior penetrator in the draft could go a long way. Linebacker next to Fred Warner is a huge question. Nick Martin's concussion situation is still unresolved, and Dee Winters struggled in coverage. You need someone who can run, cover, and stay on the field in passing situations. At corner, Diamador Lenore needs a reliable partner. Renardo Green might develop, but you can't go into the season hoping. At safety, Malik Mustafa is solid downhill, but they badly need a true coverage safety who can take away the middle of the field. So let me throw this to you. If you were running the Niners, what's the single position you'd prioritize this offseason? Offensive line, edge rusher, wide receiver, linebacker, or safety? Type it in the comments. This is why I keep saying the Niners don't just need one star. They need multiple solid upgrades. And that's also why trading away 3 or 4 premium assets for one player feels so risky. Quick reminder, If you like these deep roster conversations, hit subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to like the video so more Niners fans see it. Because once you understand how many holes there really are, the next big question becomes how San Francisco uses the draft and what they do with Mac Jones. And that might be the most important decision of the entire offseason. All right, now let's talk about the draft and the Mac Jones situation, because this is where things could really swing one way or the other for the 49ers. Mac Jones might quietly be one of the most valuable trade chips in the entire league right now. And that sounds crazy until you look at the quarterback landscape. This is a thin draft class. There aren't many sure things at the top, and there are several teams picking early that still don't have a real answer at quarterback. When you combine that with Mac's team-friendly contract, suddenly he becomes extremely attractive. Think about it from another team's perspective. Instead of overdrafting a rookie, you can trade for Mac, pay him about $7 million in year one, and immediately have a proven starter who helped the Niners win games when Brock Purdy was out. That matters. San Francisco doesn't make the playoffs without Mac. This season, he went 5-3 as the starter, and he showed he can run Kyle Shanahan's offense at a high level. So if a team comes calling with a first or a high second-round pick, that's where things get really interesting. I'm big on quarterback security. I like having Mac behind Brock. But if you can turn him into premium draft capital, that's how you accelerate a rebuild. That's how you fill multiple holes instead of just one. Now, this also ties directly into the idea of trading up in the draft. There's been talk about Ruben Bain, the edge rusher out of Miami. If the Niners want him, they probably have to move into the top 5. And the only realistic way to do that is by packaging their first-round pick with Mac Jones and possibly another high pick. That's a massive move, but Bain is the kind of player who can anchor your defensive line for the next decade alongside Nick Bosa. He's strong against the run, explosive as a pass rusher, and about as safe of a prospect as you'll find. So the front office is staring at two very different paths. One path is trading Mac for picks, staying put in the first round, and using volume to rebuild the roster. Offensive line, wide receiver, edge, linebacker, safety. Spread it out and hope John Lynch finally strings together a run of solid drafts. The other path is using Mac as leverage to move way up the board for a blue-chip defender, then trying to fill the rest of the roster with cheaper options and late-round picks. That's higher risk, higher reward. Let me ask you this. Would you trade Mac Jones and a first-round pick to move into the top 5 for Ruben Bain? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments. And while you're there, make sure you like the video if you want a full draft breakdown later on. If we get enough likes, I'll dive deeper into prospects and realistic draft scenarios. And don't forget to subscribe as we push toward 1,000 subscribers. No matter which route they choose, one thing is clear. The Niners can't afford to keep alternating hits and misses in the draft. The Seahawks and Rams have gotten younger, faster, and deeper because they've been stacking successful picks. San Francisco has to do the same. And that brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. What a realistic offseason actually looks like. How aggressive the front office should be, and what counts as success when all of this is said and done. So here's where I land on all of this. And this is me trying to be as realistic as possible about where the 49ers are right now. If I'm running this offseason, I'm not pushing all my chips in on one massive trade. I'm not emptying the draft cupboard for Max Crosby or paying top-of-the-market money for Justin Jefferson. As exciting as those names are, I think that path creates just as many problems as it solves. Instead, I'm building this thing in layers. First, I'm fixing the offensive line. That's non-negotiable. Center and left guard have to be addressed. Whether that's through free agency, the draft, or both. Brock Purdy is your franchise quarterback, and everything starts with keeping him clean and opening up the run game. Without that, nothing else matters. Second, I'm rebuilding the wide receiver room with speed and youth. I'm fine letting Jawan Jennings walk if the price gets too high. I love what he brings, but you can't overpay for a slower possession receiver when this offense desperately needs separation and explosiveness. I'd rather sign a vertical threat in free agency and then draft a receiver early who can create yards after the catch. That gives you balance instead of one expensive contract. Third, I'm adding pass rush help on defense, ideally through the draft. Whether that's staying put and taking the best edge available or making a calculated move up for someone like Ruben Bain, I want another young difference maker next to Nick Bosa. Pair that with continued development from C.J. West and Alfred Collins, and suddenly the defensive line starts to look dangerous again. Fourth, I'm using the rest of my resources to fill linebacker, corner, and safety with smart value-based moves, not splashy signings. Just players who can run, cover, and stay on the field. And if someone offers me a first or high second for Mac Jones, I'm probably taking it. I hate losing quarterback depth, but that kind of capital helps you build a complete roster. To me, an offseason success isn't landing one superstar. It's coming out of the draft with multiple starters, adding 2 or 3 real contributors in free agency, and entering the season younger, faster, and deeper across the board. Let me know where you stand. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about this offseason? Type optimistic or pessimistic in the comments. And if you've made it this far, do me a favor. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. That support lets me keep putting out detailed Niners content for you.